On January 9th, a call was placed that went largely unnoticed. Now, this wasn't some big public address or a treaty signing, but it was incredibly significant. The people on the line? Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy, Steve Witkoff. The official statement from Kyiv was short, almost clinical, but the timing and the subject matter, they were anything but routine. This call wasn't about weapons or what's happening on the front lines. No, this was the opening move in a very, very different kind of campaign.
The conversation was described as long and substantive, and at the heart of it was this one massive proposal from Kyiv, a potential free trade agreement with the United States. And we're not talking about renewing some old pact or making a minor tweak to tariffs. No, this is a brand new comprehensive economic treaty. It's an idea designed to completely rewire the flow of money and goods into Ukraine. And if it works, it could alter the economic map of Eastern Europe for a generation. It's a proposal that's been quietly in the works for months, just waiting for the right moment to be brought into the light. And that right there is the key. A call between a head of state and a special presidential envoy that is not a standard diplomatic channel. Witkoff isn't the Secretary of State. He's not a career ambassador. He is a direct line to the president, a political player picked for a very specific job. So making this call with these two people talking about this subject, it's a deliberate signal. It's like a flare shot up over the diplomatic landscape for everyone to see. Allies in Europe, adversaries in Moscow, and maybe most importantly, the global financial markets in New York, London, and Tokyo. The message is pretty clear. The game is shifting from one of just military survival to one of long-term economic integration and strategic investment. To really get the gravity of this proposed trade deal, you have to understand it isn't happening in a vacuum. It's not just some standalone policy they're floating to see what happens. It's actually the final, and maybe the most critical, piece of a much larger plan that's been under construction for years. You could call it the capstone of a grand vision for what Ukraine is supposed to become after all this is over.
And this vision, it has a name, the Prosperity Plan. It's a 10-year national strategy with a goal so huge it almost sounds abstract, to bring in and deploy about $800 billion in capital. Now that number isn't just for rebuilding bridges and power plants. It's meant to be a total economic stimulus designed to let entire sectors of the Ukrainian economy, everything from farming to tech to defense, leapfrog into the 21st century. It is aiming for nothing less than the complete economic rebirth of the nation.
But even a plan that big doesn't just appear out of thin air. The groundwork was actually laid years ago, specifically with the 2025 Minerals Agreement. This was a deal between the two countries that gave U.S. investors and companies priority access, basically a right of first refusal, on any future projects to develop Ukraine's vast and mostly untapped mineral resources. We're talking about Europe's biggest reserves of titanium and iron, huge deposits of lithium, cobalt, rare earth elements, all the stuff that's essential for modern tech.
Right, and that 2025 agreement was never really about rocks. It was about two things: strategic denial and strategic dependence. First, it makes sure that those critical resources, the very foundation of everything from fighter jets to electric car batteries, flow west, not east. It denies them to competitors. Second, and this is the big one, it was about hardwiring Ukraine's economic survival directly into the supply chains of Western industry. The logic is brutally simple. If a U.S. tech company needs Ukrainian lithium for its batteries, or a defense contractor needs Ukrainian titanium for its jets, well then Ukraine's stability suddenly stops being a line item in a foreign aid budget. It becomes a core economic and national security interest for the United States. That agreement was the anchor. This new trade deal, this is the engine.
Okay, so let's break down the mechanics of this new proposal. The headline feature is a zero-tariff policy for trade with the United States. Now, on the surface, that makes Ukrainian goods, from steel to grain to software, incredibly competitive in the biggest consumer market on the planet. It's a massive economic carrot. But the real strategy is a lot more nuanced, a lot more targeted, than just cutting all tariffs across the board.
And here's the crucial detail. This zero tariff status wouldn't apply to the whole country. It would be surgically applied to newly established, specially designated industrial zones. These zones would operate under a completely different set of rules from the rest of the country. Different legal frameworks, different regulatory oversight, different customs enforcement, all of it designed to meet the standards that Western multinational corporations expect. You shouldn't think of these as just simple industrial parks. A better way to think about them is military. These are economic beachheads. A beachhead is a fortified position you set up in a hostile territory, and from there you project power and expand. That's exactly what these are designed to be. They are secure, fortified enclaves for Western capital, technology, and manufacturing standards to land safely inside Ukraine. The goal isn't to slowly patch up the old Ukrainian economy. The goal is to create powerful, new economic gravity wells that will, over time, pull the country's entire industrial base out of its old post-Soviet orbit and lock it into a new, Western-aligned one. It is an act of economic engineering on a national scale.
I mean, the sheer scale of the ambition here is it's hard to overstate. $800 billion over 10 years. The logistical challenge of actually deploying that much money effectively, especially in a country that's still facing huge security threats, is immense. It just raises the fundamental question of, is it even feasible? Where does that money actually come from? And how on earth do you convince the people who own it to send it to one of the highest risk places on the planet?
You know, the $800 billion number itself isn't the real problem. The global capital markets can handle that. Private equity, sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, they're all constantly looking for places to put their money. The money exists. The real barrier, the one thing that keeps investors up at night, is risk. Political risk, legal risk, physical security risk. How can a board of directors justify spending $1 billion on a factory when it could be seized by the government, crippled by new regulations, or just physically destroyed in a few years? This free trade agreement, and especially creating these zones, is the proposed answer to that question. It's Washington signaling that any investments inside these areas are operating under a different risk profile. It's basically a de facto security guarantee, not with troops, but with the full weight of a U.S. trade treaty. It tells the markets that these zones are vital American economic interests. President Zelensky has been very public, very clear about what the goals are here. In his statements after the call, he said the deal would give Ukraine huge competitive advantages. But the phrase he used that was more telling, I think, was that it would secure an additional assurance of economic security. Those are his exact words, and you can bet they were chosen very carefully.
He also added a really critical instruction. He said that to get this proposal from just an idea to a reality, the details needed to be discussed directly with U.S. President Donald Trump. He's deliberately trying to lift this up and out of the normal, slow-moving bureaucracy of the state and commerce departments and take it straight to the top.
So let's unpack the psychology of that phrase, economic security, because it means two totally different things to the two sides here. For Kyiv, economic security is basically another word for national sovereignty. It means making Ukraine so intertwined with and so vital to the Western economic system that its independence becomes non-negotiable. It's a poison pill strategy. The more Western money that's invested, the more the West has to protect that investment. Now, for Washington, economic security means securing those mineral supply chains, creating a strong economic ally in the region, and gaining long-term leverage. The request for a direct meeting with Trump, that just reinforces this. This isn't a negotiation over soybean tariffs. It's a request for a high-level political commitment. It's about getting that presidential handshake that says, we're making this happen, which then forces the entire U.S. government to get in line and do it.
So who stands to benefit the most from all this? The hidden hand in this deal goes way beyond government offices. You just have to follow the flow of that $800 billion. The first beneficiaries will be the specific U.S. and multinational corporations that get first dibs on those mineral rights from the 2025 deal. Then you've got the giant engineering, construction, and logistics firms, the Bechtels and Halliburtons of the world, who'd be hired to build the infrastructure for these zones. And finally, you have the financial institutions on Wall Street, investment banks, asset managers like BlackRock, who will structure the deals, raise the money, and take a cut of every dollar that flows in. It's an entire economic ecosystem just waiting to be created. And this trade deal is the key that starts the whole engine.
A strategic move of this size is bound to provoke a reaction. So we have to look at the future scenarios, the different ways this could play out. The first, and most dangerous, is a severe escalation. The deal is seen by adversaries not as an economic partnership, but as a profound act of strategic aggression, basically an attempt to annex Ukraine economically. In that scenario, these new industrial zones don't become hubs of prosperity, they become the #1 targets for a new, intensified wave of hybrid warfare. We're talking persistent, crippling cyber attacks on their power grids and logistics, political destabilization, industrial sabotage, and massive disinformation campaigns designed to make the zones look so chaotic that no sane investor would ever go near.
Which of course raises the fundamental question that planners in both Kyiv and Washington must be weighing. Are the potential long-term economic gains really worth the certainty of provoking that kind of immediate, severe, and sustained backlash? I mean, by creating these zones, you're essentially painting giant bullseyes on the most valuable parts of your future economy. Is a trade deal really a strong enough shield to defend against that?
Then you have the second scenario, a protracted stalemate, the long, grinding middle ground. In this future, the trade deal gets signed, there are press conferences, political victory is declared. The zones are legally created on paper. But that $800 billion, it never really shows up. It comes in a trickle, not a flood.
A few showcase projects get built, but the big investment wave never arrives. Investors just stay on the sidelines, spooked by the risk and the constant low-grade hybrid warfare. And so Ukraine finds itself locked in a state of permanent economic dependency, a ward of the West. Its economy is just strong enough to survive on IMF loans and foreign aid, but it's too weak to ever truly achieve escape velocity and thrive on its own.
It's like a kind of economic purgatory, a state of being partially rebuilt but never fully recovered. It's such a fragile existence, and the question is, how long can a nation and its people really sustain themselves in that kind of limbo? It just creates this deep, systemic instability that could last for decades, like a wound that never properly healed.
And that leads to the third and most transformative possibility, the collapse of the old order. The plan, against all odds, actually works. The security risks are managed, the investment flows in, the zones flourish, they expand. Ukraine successfully uses its resources, its highly educated people, and its special access to the U.S. market to become a genuine, Western-aligned economic powerhouse. This outcome doesn't just rebuild Ukraine, it shatters the existing strategic map of Eastern Europe. It creates a new center of economic and political gravity that forces every other country in the region, from Poland and Turkey to Germany, to completely reevaluate their positions. The crucial thing to remember is this: while it's being presented as a plan for economic recovery, its success would be as geopolitically disruptive as any war. And that leaves us with one final, unavoidable question. In this high-stakes game for a new economic reality, what is the true price? Not a failure, but a victory.